I was born and raised in east side of San Jose, California. And it's funny because all my friends used to call the east side the evil side. It was not uncommon to hear about shootings, stabbings, fightings. It was not uncommon to see prostitution happen at the park where we all used to hang out. And it was not uncommon for all of us to have a sibling that was in prison. It was not uncommon for all of us, myself included, to come from a single parent home. And all of those things were just normal. Growing up without a dad or growing up without a father to look up to was really difficult. And I craved the attention of someone that I can look up to. And the person I started to really look up to was my brother. He got swept away into the street life, game banging and all that stuff at a young age. So when I was growing up, looking at my brother like my dad, my father figure, I wanted to really just be like him in every single way. So I was about 10 years old the first time I smoked marijuana, and around the same age when I started drinking alcohol. And it wasn't long after that, when I was in 6th grade, that I sold my first baggie, my first sack of marijuana. And I remember the person who gave me this told me, he gave me 2 sacks and said, "Marco, you could be dumb and smoke them, or you could be smart and sell them." So I decided to sell my first sack of marijuana when I was in 6th grade. And I'll never forget the feeling I got when I walked up to a person and they took the bag and they gave me money. And I thought to myself at that point, wow, this is easy. Now I can have lunch money and buy a little something that I want. And it just became addicting. And I started to kind of get more and more affiliated with selling drugs and more affiliated with selling marijuana. And there was a time where I was speaking to one of my relatives about the need of wanting to grow in my business. And when I was sharing with him that I wanted to start really selling marijuana, that same day he met an old friend at a gas station who was staring him down. And so he was staring back, and the man who was staring at my relative called him out by name. And so my relative turned around, looked at him and said, "Who are you?" And he replied, "I'm crazy." That was his nickname. And it dawned on my relative that they used to go to juvenile hall when they were kids together. And apparently Crazy was now known as the Weed Man. And so he had all the connections. He had everything that I was looking for at that time. So we got connected, and that started a relationship between myself and Crazy, which happened a little bit later in high school. At this time, I was probably 14, 15 years old, and I was hanging out with this guy who was in his mid to late 20s. And he'd pick me up from my mom's house, and he would take me cruising downtown, and everybody knew him. Like every red light that we would get to, everybody was yelling out "Crazy," and everybody knew this guy. So in my mind, my young mind during this time, when I looked at him, I thought to myself, this is exactly who I want to be. I want to be just like Crazy. And he started to sell me this dream of what I could become if I stayed close to him. After some time, I started to kind of get into some issues at school with certain groups and certain crews. So what ended up happening was there was a group at school that started to make some threats to me. I didn't really think much of it. I had a bunch of friends with me as well that we all were like brothers. We did everything together. So I thought to myself, well, it's not that big of a deal. If they have a problem with me, then they have friends, I have friends. We can settle this or whatever. But one day things got real because I got home, and when I was parking in front of my mom's house, I noticed that there was a car who came around the corner, and right when he hit the corner, they turned off their headlights, but they kept driving. So I caught that, and I thought that was really interesting. You know, I'd seen some movies before, so I was like, that's not normal. And when the car ended up pulling over, I saw 2 older men walk out of the car and start walking to my mom's house. And they were trying to look in the window, and I was staring like, oh my gosh, like, what's going on? And they turned around. One of them locked eyes with me, and he asked, "Are you Marco?" At that point, I knew that it would be dumb if I said yes, So I just shook my head and I said, no, that's not, I don't know who Marco is. I'm not Marco. He doesn't live here. My neighbor isn't Marco. You have like the wrong place. So these two men then turned around, walked back to the car, got in, headlights came on, and they drove off. That was the first time where I felt that I was actually in danger. It went from the game of trying to be tough in high school and say this and say that to actually like, oh my gosh, what I'm doing is not only adding some pressure on me, but also putting my siblings and my mom in a awkward situation. So it wasn't long after that I walked into my mom's bedroom and I sat down next to her and I said, Mom, I don't know how to tell you this, but I need to leave San Jose. And she looked at me, and I'm in high school, probably a sophomore in high school or whatever. And she looked at me and she says, what? Like, where are you going to go? And the name that came to my mind at that point was my aunt, Socorro, or my tia Socorro, like we used to call her. And my tia Socorro was my mom's eldest sister, had the reputation of being a Christian now. She had converted to Protestantism, and she had become a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. This was my first real exposure to Christianity. Here I am in this car with my cousin Fern, and literally it took us like 3 days, 2 nights to get to Arkansas, and all he did was literally talk about Jesus. And it was like so interesting to see this man that I grew up hearing so many stories about, and all he's talking about is how he doesn't do drugs anymore, he doesn't do this anymore, he threw away all of his trophies from a card club competitions, and he was only about Christ. And for me, that was really impacting, for lack of a better word. Even though I may have not necessarily seen it like that, right? I felt like a hostage. I was on the freeway going, 60, 65 miles per hour, being told about God. He shared his testimony, and he had 3 days. He had a pretty captive audience. So we get to Arkansas, and here I am now living for the first time in a Christian home. It was really interesting. No family is perfect, Christian or non-Christian. It was interesting how much they strove to be kind to each other, how much they strove to be patient with one another, and how much they strove to have worship. They went to church on the weekends, and it was just really interesting. This is my first exposure. I'm 15, 16 years old, and I'll never forget the first Saturday of me being there. The first Saturday, my aunt knocked on my door, and I was in bed, and she said, hey, Marco, get ready because we're going to be going to church today. And I thought to myself, like, oh, my aunt doesn't know that I don't go to church. So let me educate her, and let me tell her that I don't go to church. But I'll tell her that I'll wait until they get back. So that's what I did in Spanish. I said, oh, tia, I'm so sorry, but I don't go to church. You guys can go, and don't worry, I'll be here when you guys get back. And I'm not sure how many of you guys have a tia around, but that didn't go so well. And she kindly told me that as I lived there, that I was going to be going to church with the family. And oh man, my blood was boiling because I was like, how dare she tell me what to do? And I remember thinking like, okay, well, if I'm going to go to church, right, I'm at least going to wear like the best of the best. So I went in my closet and I found my creased up black Dickies, and I got those out, and I had some really nice red, black, and white Jordans. I forgot what number they were, and I got those out. And then I had a big old shirt of a movie scene from the movie Scarface, which is Al Pacino smoking a big old cigar and all these drugs on the table in front of him. And that's the shirt that I ironed and I put on, and I was ready to go to church. I'm sure all of you guys have heard at one point or another, well, I don't go to church because I'll burn up, or whatever the case may be. But I literally started to think that was true, because when I was sitting in that church service, I was sweating bullets, I was super hot, and I could not stand being in that church service. And I'd use every excuse to leave. I would go to the restroom, and I would go in their little foyer waiting area and read all the announcements on the walls. And I knew when the knitting club was, when the worship was, when the young adults hung out. I knew everything. I was trying to take the most amount of time not to be in church. But the crazy part about it was, through this experience, of being exposed to a family that not only talked about Christianity, but practiced it in their home, it really impacted me. And it wasn't long after that Fern and I started to talk about the Bible, and that Fern gave me my first ever Bible study. Here I was getting baptized, and I had a burden on my heart that I wanted to go back home to be able to share Jesus with my family, my siblings, my neighborhood. I was counseled and advised that it was too soon, that I was too young, that I was too early in the faith, but I went against that. And after I finished my sophomore year of high school, I was heading back to San Jose with a mission on my heart. And when I got back to San Jose, it was interesting. The very first night, my mom made my little bed in the living room, and she got the couch ready for me to sleep in. And as I was about to get into bed, I turned around and I asked my mom in Spanish. I said, "Mom, can I pray for you?" And she looked at me and she goes, "What?" And I said, "Can I pray for you?" And I just remember seeing my mom just start to cry because she couldn't believe that this young son of hers who had gone to Arkansas had actually come back different. And I started to go to church in Maranatha, and I started to draw closer to God through that church. And I found a group of believers who really fostered me. They saw that I was young. They saw that I was immature. They saw that I was weak in my faith and all of these different things. They embraced me like a family, and they encouraged me in my faith. And God started to do some crazy things. I mean, I remember my mom being off at work late at night, and I would have 4, 5, 6 of my friends who were from the neighborhood at my mom's house, all kneeling in the living room, holding hands and asking Jesus to become real to them, and them just breaking down and feeling the Holy Spirit really speaking to them and calling them. And friends who would say, "Pray for my mom, she's doing PCP again. Pray for my mom, she's on meth again," and all of these different things. And I saw God moving in the neighborhood really powerfully. And I was attempting to walk in the faith and attempting to move forward. But little by little, I felt myself lowering the standards that I had lived by up to that point. And little by little, I started to let go of the faith that I had found in Arkansas. And it wasn't long before one night, it was one of my friend's birthdays, and he said, "Marco, I know you're a Christian, but you have to drink with me tonight." And I said, "Bro, I really don't want to." And he said, "Bro, it's just one night. It's my birthday. We're like brothers. You haven't done this in such a long time. Just tonight. And unfortunately, I gave in and I drank that night. And then I smoked a little later that night. And that one night turned into like 5 years of mess. I know it's crazy just thinking about how long it took, but when I really let go and started doing some of the things that I used to do, it really put me in a position where it was like if I've never left. I threw 4, 5, 6 years of my life back into the same things that I had left. And the crazy part about it was during that time where I started drinking, I started smoking again, I started hanging out in certain areas, the thought came to my mind that, man, if I'm already doing all of this, then I might as well start working again. I might as well start selling drugs again. And that's exactly the road that I took. So towards the middle of my junior year of high school, I started to sell weed again. And it was crazy because during this time, it was almost as if the Holy Spirit was always calling out to me and trying to draw me back because I didn't feel peace. So I started to drink a little bit more often. I started to smoke a little bit more often. And it was almost as if I was numbing my conscience into telling me to do anything different.
Wake up in the morning, yawning, rolling up a joint. Keeps calling, but tell me what's the point? All she gonna do is nag about the crazy life I have, what I did last night, and what I shouldn't have. Always hear her cry, always see me laugh. Can't trip off that, can't slack my Mac, nah, I never have. Got clientele, I bet you tell, cause I'm rolling fat. Neighbors ain't tripping, steady sipping, picture that. 22's on the hip, ass slick, it's a rap. Smashing through the ain't no coming back. Tripping on my fast life, nah, I never have. Hustling is my birthright, how I'm getting cash. Yeah, I really ain't ask about it, no bass. Call it what you want.
As I was getting ready to go, I remember I got a phone call from one of my friends. And while I was talking to him, I said, hey, do you want to come with me? Like, I'm going to go drop some stuff off and we're going to party for a whole weekend. Do you want to come with me? And I remember it was his sister's birthday, so he couldn't come. But in that conversation, he was with another young man that I knew. His name was Abraham. And Abraham jumps on the phone and says, hey, I hear that you're going and you're going to party. Can I come with you? And I thought to myself, and I was like, man, I don't know when I'm going to come back, actually. So I told him, I said, if I go, it may be 3 days, it may be 5 days. I don't know, but I don't know when I'm going to come back. And he said, it doesn't matter. I want to go. And we took off together. It was just me and him, me and Abraham. And we drove all the way to Fresno area, and I dropped off what I dropped off. And a friend of mine made the recommendation and said, let's go to Fresno. There's a little hookah lounge bar that I like to go to. Let's go there. And everyone was excited about it. And we decided to go. And we got there and we did what we did. And unfortunately, not all of us made it back. I actually woke up the next morning handcuffed to a hospital bed. There was a sheriff that was sitting next to me, and he waited until I woke up and he asked me, he goes, is your name Marco? And I said, yeah, that's me. And he said, I'm so glad you woke up because I want to let you know that you killed your friend last night. What do you mean I killed my friend last night? It has to be some sort of misunderstanding, or it has to be some sort of miscommunication or something, but this cannot be reality. And he walked out and said, have a nice life. And there I was, handcuffed to a hospital bed, and my world was literally just turned upside down because Abraham was dead. I went from there to Fresno County Jail. When I was in Fresno County Jail, I was being told I could do anywhere from 5 to 10 years in prison. And I was sitting there, and all I could think about was, had I not left Jesus, Abraham would still be alive. And I saw they had printed my mugshot and put it on a bracelet that they give all the inmates. And I saw my mugshot, and I kid you not, I looked at that picture and I thought to myself, he's a monster. This doesn't look like me. And it was in those moments, and I had spent a few days in the hospital and now a few days in jail, and my mind started to kind of calm down a little bit. I wasn't drinking, smoking, doing drugs. I couldn't. And for the first time in years, I heard the whispering of God telling me to come home. Now that was crazy because I was so far from him. But here was God. Somehow I felt an impression that God was telling me to come home. And I started to do what most people do when they get themselves in a lot of trouble. And I started to make promises to God. God, if you get me out of this one, if you save me from this thing, I'll stop smoking, I'll stop drinking, I'll go back to church, all of this long list of things, I will start doing this. And I got a message about a week there telling me that someone had bailed me out. Now, the crazy part about it is the bail amount was over $15,000. So I knew that there's no way that my mom was going to be bailing me out. It was weird that I was bailed out. And when I walked out of Fresno County Jail, there was a familiar car that was parked in the front with some familiar faces. A couple of my friends that I grew up with were in that car, but most notably was Crazy. Crazy was in the car. And I got in the car, and Crazy looked over at me and he said, man, like, what'd you do? And we were talking and I was sharing, and he said, Marco, don't worry, I'm going to take care of you. We'll get a lawyer and you'll do a couple years in prison. You'll be fine. Here I was, I just made some promises to God that I was going to be different. And yet one of my friends hands me a joint and says, Marco, you need this more than we do. And I was stuck in the middle of promises to God and my lifestyle calling me. I smoked on the way home. And the very next day, I grabbed another cell phone, and now I felt obligated that I needed to continue to start selling drugs and keep selling drugs. And I continued. The very next day, I was making drops. I was out on bail at this time, going to court, facing 5 to 10 years in prison for killing my friend. And all of these different things were coming at me. So I started to live even more carelessly than before. I knew that I was going to go away for a while. So I got deeper into alcoholism, deeper into drug addiction. What ended up happening was I got a call from Crazy. And he gave me a call and he said, Marco, I need to see you. And it was late at night. And he said, hey, I'm on the block of San Antonio. I need some stuff. And I was trying to get a ride, but I couldn't find one. So I called him back and I said, Crazy, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. And what he responded was, I drove 3 hours and paid a bunch of money to get you out of jail. I know that you can find the ride. And I actually fell asleep looking for a ride. I was woken up later that evening, the next morning. It was someone on the phone that was yelling in my ear on the phone saying, do you know who did it? Do you know who did it? I was confused. I was still waking up and I was thinking, did what? They kept yelling, do you know who did it? Were you there? And finally, I just asked, what are you talking about? And they responded and said, Crazy is dead. And I couldn't believe it because I just talked to him and I thought to myself, how can Crazy be dead? I learned later that that very place I was supposed to be at, there was an altercation that broke out. Someone took a gun out and killed a couple people, Crazy being one. And I thought to myself, I should have been there. That somehow, some way, I knew deep down in my heart that had I found a ride, I would have been one of those dead. I was sitting there kind of stunned. And I remember just praying a simple little prayer that said, God, if there's still room or in place in heaven for someone like me, I really need help. Here I was in Santa Clara jail, and while I was getting booked, all I could think about was the prayer that I had prayed recently. And I was thinking to myself, how is this all going to fit into the grand scheme of things? But finally, when I was taken to my jail cell and left there, I was by myself. And when I was in my jail cell, I remember looking at the wall and there was a carving across the wall. And when I took a step back to read it, it read, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. When I was getting baptized in Arkansas back in 2005, the pastor asked what he should read before I got baptized. And as I was about to get baptized, I shared with him that I wanted him to read that specific Bible verse found in Psalms 23. When I saw that Bible verse on the wall, I realized that it was nothing more than the voice of God speaking directly to me. How could it be that the same Bible verse that I was baptized in several years ago was the Bible verse that is now written on the wall? And I remember kneeling down and inviting Jesus into my heart and telling him, God, I'm broken, I'm a drug addict, I'm a liar, I've destroyed people's lives, but I need help and I need something new to happen. And God took me in. Still an addict, God took me in. Still a liar, God took me in. He accepted that prayer that I prayed and he took me in and called me son. I went to Fresno County so that I can start serving my sentence. I spoke to the Department of Justice and I told them that if we skip trial and I just pled guilty, that I would be willing to serve 3 years in prison. When I got to court, the judge read me the crime and I pled guilty. And when she read the punishment, she gave me 5 years of felony probation with a 6-month house arrest time. The lawyer couldn't believe it, that I did not serve a single day in prison for the crime that I had committed. I was drinking and driving, I wrecked my car, killed my friend, and not going to prison. In my heart, I had a burden that I needed to serve God. I felt like I had a new lease on life, and I couldn't just live it for myself anymore, and I wanted to serve God. It was during that season where I started to go to a church called San Jose Central. It was at that church where I came in contact with Pastor Tony Rodriguez. And Pastor Tony Rodriguez was more than a pastor. He was like a father to me. And he adopted me basically and took me under his wing and started to teach me what ministry was. I started giving Bible studies to some of the same people that I used to sell drugs to. And I started to see some of my friends that I grew up with also come to Jesus. It was incredible to see what God started to do, and God started to open doors where I started to be able to speak to different people about my journey and how nothing compared to walking with Jesus. And it was during this season that I heard about a youth ministry called Youth Rush. And this ministry specifically was young people who would go door to door and they would share their faith. And I thought to myself that this was something that I needed to try. So I signed up for my very first summer in 2014. And now it was crazy because I was trying to now go do ministry, but I had just came to Jesus. In fact, I just got rebaptized in 2012, which was just 2 years prior of me doing my first summer as a missionary in the States. And I remember going door to door and literally just telling people of how God had changed me, how God had delivered me from addiction to alcohol, from addiction to substances, how he was continually working on me and recreating me and giving me a new heart and a new mind. Youth Rush was only 10 weeks, but I felt God calling me to go further. And I went to this little Bible institute called Souls West, where I learned how to share my faith more effectively. And it was here that I started to really dive into the Bible and start to really learn of God. And after I graduated from there in 2016, I went to work at a local church as a Bible worker. And it was really a cool experience there because not only did I get to lead people to Jesus at this church, but I got to lead this young lady to be my wife. And it was an incredible experience being able to do ministry with her and just being at that church and telling people about Jesus and going door to door still and giving Bible studies in the community and telling people, this is what God has done for me. I know that he can do it for you. He has restored me and restoring me from the mistakes I've made, the decisions I made in my past. In fact, when Lisa and I were married and we had our first child, we were thinking about his name and we were going over a bunch of different names, trying to figure what we were going to be calling him the rest of his life. And my wife looked at me one day and she said, "What about Abraham?" And I sat there and I thought to myself, what an honor. There is no better name that I want to call my son than Abraham, the young man that lost his life because of a decision that I made. He's my soft reminder or hard reminder, whatever you want to call it, of how God can use even the most disappointed moments to bring about one of the most powerful testimonies. He's my daily reminder of how God has brought me, and also my daily reminder of the pain of sin, how far the devil can take you to, and how deep the pain can go. God's thoughts, ideals, and plans are really always bigger than anything you could ever dreamed or imagined. Sometimes I'm like, man, God, like, I can't believe that you've given me so much more than anything I could have ever imagined. And I doubt that he's finished. And sometimes I feel like when we think about following God or becoming a Christian or whatever, then right away we start to think of all the things we have to give up. But what about thinking of all the things you gain by following him? All the things that you get to experience because of following him. I think that that's oftentimes overlooked. And God is the giver of all good things, scripture says, and He will never withhold any good thing from those who walk uprightly. It's too much to comprehend, but I'm so happy that I get to live a purpose-driven life because of him.